right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining the call today. My name is Kellen Lovell, and I'm the Director of Strategy and Operations at the Purposeful Growth Institute. I'm so delighted to see names and faces that have joined us either on a virtual info session or met us on your campus. I'm so glad that many of you are continuing to learn more about this great opportunity. And even happier that you get to hear from a voice other than mine today and the wonderful team at the National Park Service. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Stephen Thompson, to introduce himself and the rest of the team, and then take it away from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Kellen, and welcome everyone. So great to see you. This is where our team at the Business Management Group of the National Park Service starts to get pulled into this process and meet all of you. So it's really great to see all you here. And thanks to Kellen and Purposeful Growth Institute for connecting you all to us in this opportunity. My name is Stephen Thompson. I have been working for the National Park Service since 2016, and I've been the agency lead for our National Parks Business Plan internship for the past, I guess, going on 6 years. Before that, I was a BPI consultant myself in 2015. So I was sitting where you sit now 10 years ago. It's my 10-year anniversary of being in your shoes. So I've been there. Welcome. It's an exciting opportunity. I know you have a lot of opportunities at this point in your grad school career. So really excited that you're joining us. Yeah, as we going, I do want to call out 2 of my colleagues who are going to be joining to provide a little bit of the kind of candidate perspective. So we have, in order of when they joined the team, Jeb Ricketts, who joined, I guess you eked out Sydney by a couple of weeks. So Jeb, you want to come on and say hi, introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I started October 6th and had originally been a part of the BPI internship in Canaveral National Seashore, about an hour east of Orlando, and I did that during the summer of 2023. So very, very recent, and graduated in May, interviewed with Stephen for the BMG role, and now I am on the team and helping manage the internship process. So I'm very excited for it.
Thanks, Jeb. And we also have Sydney Moran. Sydney, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sydney. I'm also an analyst with the Business Management Group. I got my MBA from the Yale School of Management, so hopefully there are some of you from SOM on the call today. I did the BPI internship in the summer of 2022. I was at the Blue Ridge Parkway in Asheville, North Carolina, doing some transportation planning. It was a really great opportunity and excited to be with the BMG now and to, get to meet all of you, hopefully.
All right. Thanks, Sydney. And I failed to mention, I was at Mammoth Cave National Park for the summer in Kentucky. So yeah, I shout that out while we're at it. Great. Thanks, Sydney. Jeb, I'll be pulling their voices in. Again, this is their first year through the interviewing process on this side of things. So I'll be probably answering most of your questions from the National Park Service side, but they have a much better perspective of what it's like to go through this. And so be looking to them to kind of bring up some best tips. All right, before we move on, can I get a visual thumbs up from someone that you can see a screen? There's lots of BPI consultants on our, okay, cool. Want to make sure we're going to move forward. All right, so just to start off, I know that you are here because you've heard of the Business Plan Internship Program. So you probably don't need this 30-second overview, but maybe we'll stumble, somebody will stumble on this on YouTube or something and be interested in hearing what it's about. So I like to give a quick primer. We, the National Park Service, work with our partner, Purposeful Growth Institute, to recruit you all, top-notch grad students, to serve as consultants. So this is a paid 11-week internship program. We, on the National Park Service side, work really hard to scope out project proposals, line up suitable projects that can be done in essentially 10 weeks, because we have a week of training. We pair you up in teams of 2 or 3 and send you off to a job site like Kentucky or Florida or North Carolina to live and work at your job site with your co-consultant and addressing kind of the most pressing operational challenges for these national park units. So you get a paid internship, you get hands-on management consulting experience, you're providing analysis and real-time, real-world recommendations to these park leaders. It is not just like kind of an exercise in having you do something, anything. Like they are really looking to you to help them address some of their challenges. And I think as a result, you can kind of feel that you are very warmly welcomed to the Park Service, and they kind of open all the doors for you so that you have a great sense of what operations look like. And the program dates, I'm sure we'll talk about, or you've talked about already, but May 31st to August 15th, 2025. So you want to have those dates circled. And of course, for more information, you can visit Purposeful Growth's website. All right, so other things we're going to talk about today. So just kind of quickly cover the interview process and timelines. I'm going to, as I said, pull in Cindy and Jeb to talk through tips and best practices and what they learned from the experience, how they got to where they are today. And we'll talk about particularly about the analytical exercise, which is the kind of in the final stage of a one-on-one live interview and what we look for in that. But we don't have a ton of content, so we will have a lot of times for questions at the end. So feel free to note those on the side. You can also put them in the chat. You can raise your hand, whatever. This doesn't need to be a real formal presentation by any means. All right. So quickly, we approach this as kind of as a 3-stage interview process. Your initial application is due December 2nd. So that's coming right up. Glad you're here. And I hope you kind of go right from this to getting that application in. Pretty simple. We'll have a resume, biographical information, references, and a couple of questions for you to fill out. So take some time, thinking, putting some thought into those answers. But it's not too much of a burden, I would think, compared to many applications you will fill out. From there, we will have one-way video interviews. And so from getting that link, you have 2 weeks to complete it. Again, once you get in and you do it, it's like a few minutes. It doesn't take a ton of time. It probably, my recommendation just from the outset is like, get in a good headspace to do it and just do it. Don't wait for a week and a half with it hanging over your head. But you'll have 2 weeks to do that. So due around December 16th, depending on when those links go out. And then the final round interview comes after that, so that those kick off about a month later in mid-January. We hope to have initial offers made by February 1st, and then they will kind of continue on a rolling basis after that. And we do have we do plan to have a tentative offer or tentative list of projects by that final round interview. So that you have a sense of kind of the things we'll be looking at over the summer, and we can discuss that. But we will make those offers to join us before we kind of match you up with a specific project. So just keep that in mind. If you are tied to a specific geographic area, or very particular, like that is something to kind of keep in mind during that interview process. We'll want to talk about that. All right. So as I mentioned, three stages. The first one is that initial application. No secret. Here are the 2 questions we ask you to fill out. What makes you interested, and how have you used quantitative and qualitative analysis in your past experience? So we ask for 2 professional references. Kellen, this is a PGI. You're collecting all of these right now as we speak. You have any tips or thoughts on this section?
Yeah, I think so. On that first question, my advice has been, so if you've heard this advice before in a previous conversation, apologies for the repetition, but for everyone listening here today or on the recording, I encourage you to think about your response to the first question as a contributor versus as a consumer. So a lot of people will talk about the mission of the Park Service from the perspective of a consumer, meaning they'll tell us about how many parks they've been to, their, childhood vacations at the national parks, which are all really lovely anecdotes that we love to hear about, over a beer or a bonfire someday. But in the short answer section, we're really looking for how you can uniquely contribute to the broader mission of the national parks, which goes far beyond sort of outdoor recreation and the things that so many of us enjoy about the park. So thinking from about that mission more holistically, and again, as a contributor versus a consumer. The second one about your particular analysis example, I have seen some examples from the academic context that are pretty substantive, but I think in general, you're safer with a professional example just because it shows us the type of analyses chops that we want to see. So try to avoid personal examples. Some academic examples are okay, but I think in general, you can be rest assured that a professional example is going to be closer to what we're looking for than anything else. So that's just my 2 cents there. And hope that's helpful to you as you're thinking through how you would like to present yourself.
Thanks, Kellen. That's a great 2 cents. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, so once we go through that, as I mentioned, you'll be invited to a one-way interview. So you'll receive an email invitation, and we'll ask you to submit video responses to a handful, 3 questions. So they're each between like 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes of response time. You do have like some think time beforehand, and all of the rest. You can kind of get on and check out the resources on the platform beforehand, just so you're comfortable. But don't overthink that piece. I believe, Kellen, they get one kind of redo for each question. How does that work?
So there is one prompt that is a practice prompt, but once the questions begin, there are no do-overs. So make sure you take good notes in your prep time to be able to kind of speak coherently and concisely once that little red light comes on and all the words fall out of your brain.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And I will say, we know we're the ones reviewing these, and we'll take time to look through all of your answers. We know that this is like an awkward experience, and it's awkward for everyone. So just like get over that, because it is awkward, and we know that. And so if you stumble over a word, like, it's not the end of the world. We know that you are just hearing this question for the first time, and there's a camera in front of your face and no human. And so, just do your best with it. Just try to really engage with the questions, and that's the best way to kind of make sure that your genuine self is coming out. My top tip, and I was about to kick it to Jeb and Sydney, so hopefully I don't take their top tips, but my top tip is, please don't script your answers out and then like read them to the webcam. You can really tell when you are reviewing, like, who has written down word for word what they want to say. So like absolutely take notes and have a sense of what you want to say, but don't try to script every word, or it comes out really choppy and we don't get a sense of who you are and like how you are actually approaching it. All right, Jeb and Sydney, what are your thoughts on this part of this stage?
Yeah, I can go. I actually like this stage a lot as a way to transition, between the initial application and the live interview. I think, at least for me, I found it to be a lot less stressful. You're able to do it, at your time of choosing, whatever time you find best. I agree with Stephen that it's probably best to do it pretty quickly because it really doesn't take too much time and you don't want it hanging over your head. But something I found really helpful is I just had a whiteboard next to me as I was doing the questions, and I would just write down a few thoughts that came to mind. You know, you have about 90 seconds between getting the question and having to answer, which is nice because obviously you don't get that in a live interview. And so I would just say really take that 90 seconds. Obviously, don't script an answer, but just I'm sure a lot of thoughts come to mind when you see a question, and you just want to be able to get out a few things and maybe look over to it as you're starting to speak. But that's what I found really helpful, is just writing it out and getting out everything that's in my brain.
Great tip. Thanks, Sydney.
Yeah, to add to that, and to add really to what Stephen said, this might sound like a contradiction, but sound conversational in your answer, but also formal. And so what I mean by that is that it's not a conversation in the sense that you're speaking to a camera and your response is being recorded, but make it feel like it's conversational and like you were commuting with maybe a previous boss or a previous manager that you had. And how would you respond to them if they asked a question about a time, or what about this situation? So think of it like that. And I think if you come into the mindset with like you're speaking to a manager, you could have the right formality and communication that is good versus like I'm just reading off a script and it's boring. So that would be a big takeaway. But another would be to be enthusiastic about your response. So when you were thinking about your answer in that 90 seconds, maybe you have two stories that you could tell, maybe potentially to answer the question. Which of those answers actually makes you more enthusiastic, or that you're more confident to tell? That absolutely will be seen like when we review these responses. So confidence and enthusiasm with your response, very important when identifying what to say in those 90 seconds.
Great thoughts, Jeb. Yeah, the other thing that occurs to me is I have never been in a live interview where I get cut off if I go over 90 seconds for a response. So that is different. And don't save like the most valuable point that you were trying to make for your last 5 seconds. Because if you happen to go over, like suddenly you lose that most valuable point. So, you know, make sure you're building to that. You have a cohesive answer, but don't save all the good stuff for the last 5 seconds just in case. The last thing I'll say is if you do have any technical issues, you know, sometimes that happens. We've had folks that they get halfway through and then it just like disconnects. Another reason to like kind of do it right away, reach out to Kellen, and you know, she's there to support you. We understand that those things can happen and we want to make it everyone have a successful experience. So yeah. Great. Before we move on, let's open it up to any questions about this one-way interview stage at this point. Anyone have any questions while we're thinking about it?
After we send in the initial application, how long is it before we know if we're doing this video stage or not? Or do those all go out at once? Is it a rolling thing?
Great question, Nathan. I'll kick it to Kellen for that.
Yes, so the sort of insider information about the one-way video interview is if you meet all of the eligibility requirements that we've talked about that are on the website, we've talked about them on the info sessions, you'll get an invitation to the one-way video interview, and it'll be pretty immediately after the deadline. So if not on December 2nd, it'll be on December 3rd. So really pretty quickly after that deadline or after that application closes, and then you'll have 2 weeks. I know for a lot of folks that falls during finals, which is why we give you 2 weeks to kind of fit it in at a time that's convenient, or as convenient as it can be during that kind of crazy 2 weeks. But if you have a conflict, I know some people travel over December or things like that. They have school trips that they work out as well. Please reach out to us, and we can, in some cases, make an exception. But in general, 2 weeks should give you enough time to wrap that up.
Good question. Any other questions before we move on? All right. We will have time at the end, I promise. But we are now 2/3 of the way through. Let's talk about the last stage, the live interview stage. So if you advance to this final stage, congratulations. you will receive an email invitation. The goal date we have circled on our calendars is January 10th. Subject to change as things change, but that's our goal, with interview dates of January 15th through the 27th. So this will be over webcam with a live human being. One of our team will meet with you, one of the folks on the NPS side, and we are the ones kind of serving as project managers for you over the summer. Kind of. And generally, most of us have also gone through the BPI program ourselves. So kind of understand where you're sitting. We will ask, the kind of general behavioral 15 minutes, get to know you, and understand how you think about things, get you warmed up. We have 30 minutes for an analytical exercise. And then we have 15 minutes at the end with a little spillover for question and answer, anything else you want to talk about. So we record those. They will be both rated by the interviewer, of course, but also a third party, at least one other member of the NPS team who will watch the recording and just kind of get a sense of who you are. And we're going to talk more about the analytical exercise, but listed on the side there are the things that we are really looking for out of that exercise. So structured thinking, creativity, how you approach a problem, and how you can develop some recommendations based on incomplete information, probably no experience in this question, but just kind of with the information given, how do you wrap your head around it? And that's what we're looking for. Let's see. Yeah, I think before we get into an example exercise prompt that if you've joined a info session, you might have heard already, kind of want to give a chance to pause here for any other tips for a live interview. I think my top tip, and this sounds silly, but just try to find a quiet place, because I have gotten very spoiled by we use Microsoft Teams, with PGI we use Zoom. I feel like those software platforms are very good at like isolating outside noises. The interviewing platform isn't always that great. And so if it's loud, it's distracting for us. It's just really distracting for you. And so find a quiet place, figure out what that means. We know I'm in here in my basement. We know that like you have limited options. It is okay if you are interviewing, from your kitchen table at home. That's fine. Just make sure it's quiet and that you are going to be kind of distraction free for that 60 minutes. Will go fast. Yeah, Jeb and Sydney, anything to add on just how to approach this live interview?
I'm happy to start. Oh, Sydney.
No, go for it.
This is more of a me thing than maybe what Steve or Sydney are thinking, but don't sleep on the 15 minutes for Q&A. Like you just had a stressful 45 minutes with behavioral interview questions, an analytical exercise, and now you have 15 minutes to like relax and just ask what's on your mind, ask about our projects and the works that we've done in the past, learn more about the Park Service in general, or what we've been working on, this year. I think there's just a lot of great questions that you can ask the interviewer, and they would love to share what we do. I mean, we joined the NPS because we love the NPS and we love parks and we love the benefits that we can give, I think, to potential visitors as well as the resources. So ask about our work, ask what's top of mind for you, but definitely when you finish the first 45 minutes of the interview, don't be like, oh, I don't have any questions. No, ask us questions. We love that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeb. And my point actually is going to be at the beginning of the interview with the first 15 minutes. I think with these sort of interviews where there's an exercise component, I definitely have happened to me where I get overly focused on that portion of the interview, sometimes to the detriment of the behavioral portion. And I think especially if doing this sort of exercise is new to you, you might overly focus on that, but you can still really show your strengths in the standard behavioral questions. I think that's something that we're all much more familiar with. It's more standard type of interview that you'll come across in most job interviews. So I think don't neglect that at the, expense of the exercise. You want to prepare for both, but the first 15 minutes is a really great way to make yourself stand out and show the unique individual portions of your personality and your experience.
Yeah, that's great, Sydney. And if you have joined an info session or you've watched any of the, recorded webinars, the informational webinar, we try to be very clear about what we're looking for. We're not trying to, this isn't a secret. We tell you what we're looking for, and that we really do mean it. That's why we hold this session as well. We don't want there to be any surprises. So, take some time, review those materials, and the more you are kind of keyed into what we've said we're looking for, the better. Yeah, so let's talk about the analytical exercise. As mentioned, we will give you an example, and just have found in the past that it's helpful to have us talk through what we look for. The whole purpose of this is some people are very, very comfortable doing these types of exercises, casing or cases. Others have never done it before. That was me. That was the position I was in when I interviewed for BPI. I'll be totally honest, this is the one and only case or analytical exercise that I've ever done as part of an interview. So I think I got just far enough over the bar, and that's what we're looking for, is like, understanding how you think. It's going to be a little bit different than if you are interviewing for a big consulting firm. We're a little bit different. We are public sector. So let's get into it. I have an example prompt here that I will talk through. And let me move my thing around so I can read it. So if you have joined an info session, this probably sounds familiar, but I figure that it's probably better to hit it again. I will also say this example was taken from real world experience of a project that I was asked to help on. Obviously, it's been very stylized, and names and details have been changed to protect any involved. But this is the kind of thing that we think about, and the reason our group exists. So imagine that you've been asked by NPS leadership to help Sunshine National Park assess its power generation options. So it is a remote location far from an electrical grid. They've used diesel power generators to power the administrative offices and like kind of the visitor center, visitor amenities. The generators are overdue for replacement. But before they just buy new generators, they're interested in understanding what other alternatives there are. So you've been called in to help them think about how they weigh their options. So similar structure to what we will ask you on your at your one-on-one interview. We lay out kind of the framework for you to imagine if, and then we lay out some courses of action. So one would be to reinvest in generators. That's kind of the status quo option. Another would be to install a small solar panel field and microgrid with a diesel generator backup. So it would be a small solar field that would provide enough power to power everything they need for about 9 months out of the year. And those busiest 3 months, then they would have to kind of supplement with additional diesel generator power when that use peaks. And then the third option would be install a large solar panel field and microgrid that would cover enough of their energy needs for all year. And so that would be consistent power entirely off the grid and off of diesel. So that is typically how we will frame the exercise, and then we then turn it over to you and kind of help you along as you talk to us about what is important. And so rather than asking each one of you to go through what do you think is important, I'm going to use Jeb and Sydney as kind of like, Jeb and Sydney, if you were approaching this problem, what kind of things stand out? Where would you start kind of thinking about where do you go from here? Because from here, we kind of turn it over to you, and you're in the driver's seat. So either of you want to kind of hop in with what you look for? All right.
I can start. I just didn't want to interrupt.
Face off.
You know, when you're thinking potentially of private sector analytical exercises or interviews or case-based interviews, you might go straight into a cost benefit analysis. But we're more than just costs that or benefits that you might see on an income statement, right? And the business world. So my mind goes to what are the benefits and costs, but not just the actual benefit of, say, cost savings, but the benefit to the environment that we might want to think about. So my first thing was just, I see three potential options, and I'm thinking of the costs and benefits of each one, and then asking questions in relations to that cost and benefits to find the recommendation that I think would be good. And thinking about, again, more than just like, well, a large solar panel field sounds like it's really expensive. Maybe a smaller solar panel would be better, but what are the environmental differences potentially between the two? As a quick example.
Okay, thanks, Jeb.
Yeah, as Jeb said, I think it's best to come in from more of a holistic viewpoint and think about what are the pieces of information that you'd need in order to proceed with answering the question. So I like to think of it as sorting things into quantitative information and qualitative information. So the quantitative information would be, capital costs, operating costs, what funding is available for the park to implement this kind of project. And then, as Jeb said, what are the more qualitative considerations, like what's the impact to the environment? And something that's obviously very important with NPS in particular is what's the impact to the visitor experience that ultimately is our end user. And so you always want to think about, with these parks, how does it impact the visitors who are coming to visit? And then you want to think about what's the life cycle and what's the timeline of these considerations. And so after thinking about those larger scale issues, you want to ask for the data. As the interviewers, we often have the data available. And so if you ask the question, we'll be able to give you some further information that'll help you make a decision. It's often helpful to come in with some sort of table or a framework, a matrix, and make sure you're writing down all this information. And you can be sure to, reiterate it to the interviewer just to make sure that you have everything down correctly. It's better to catch any sort of errors up front rather than, while you're doing your calculations or making your recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. To build off something there, well, first of all, I want to say these two have not had very much time to look at this prompt, so they are essentially doing this in real time. So appreciate you jumping in. Yeah, one thing Sydney said is, take some time. Remember that you are answering the question that we give you in the prompt. And so keep the big picture in mind of, you are helping the park leadership team decide between these three options. So always kind of make sure you have that big picture in mind. Like, what am I here to do? I'm at the end of this, I'm going to give them one of these answers. What kind of things do I need to feel confident that my answer can be justified against these other answers? Like, start there, and then, as Jeb said, you can kind of break it down, like, okay, I need to figure out like which one of these is better and how do I define better. So then you kind of break it down of like, okay, environmental impact, financial cost, how long is this going to last before I have to replace it again, all of those sorts of things. And so I think taking some time to really focus on what are we asking for at the onset, and what do you need to kind of convince us that this is the right way forward. The other thing I will say is it is totally appropriate and I would say expected by us that, take a minute, 2 minutes to like gather your thoughts. We don't expect you to do this like in real time, answer on the fly, and have really articulate, a whole framework of how you're thinking about this. Like jot down your notes, reflect on it, and pull out, like the top 3 things that you want to ask and where you want to dive deeper to get going. So that's totally cool. And just let us know that's what you're doing, so that it's not like you put your head down and we don't hear from you. Just say like, hey, can I take a few minutes and make my thoughts together? Like, absolutely, that's fine. That's what we want to see. So then, as Sydney and Jeb mentioned, we'll kind of turn it over to you and say, like, what do you want to know? I have some data here. What do you want to know about? And so then, if you are interested in, what the capital costs are to build these things, ask us, hey, what's it going to cost to build each one of these options? And we will, generally have that, or we'll say, oh, that's a great question. We don't actually have that data for whatever reason, and, move on to your next one. And then make that little note and adjust, your mental framework as you need to, given what you can get or what you can't get. All right, so after we do all of that kind of fun question answer, you get to kind of probe around and figure out what is important to this question. You might end up with something like this. So, again, like we try to tell you what we think is a best practice. I definitely like to see people who are like making a table, or, put things in columns so you can compare across them. That's super helpful. And so this is, just a rough estimation of what it could look like. So for the generators, you've got $2 million in capital costs to build it. Over 10 years, it's going to cost $15 million in diesel costs and everything else. High environmental costs because you're burning diesel. There's a high impact to the visitor experience because it's loud and it's noisy, and it creates smoke and all that kind of stuff. But low risk posed by changing visitation, because if you don't need as much energy, you don't burn as much diesel, right? And so you can kind of go down each column. The small solar microgrid costs more to build, so it's $15 million to build. 4 years over, or $4 million over 10 years. Got kind of medium environmental costs. You're still burning some diesel. Low impact to visitor experience because you're only burning that diesel for a few months out of the year, and that's when it's busiest anyway. And the risk posed is medium. You might end up needing more diesel than you expect if visitation increases. And then the large solar microgrid, walking through it, most expensive to build out, 20 million. Once you build it out, lower operating costs over 10 years, low environmental costs, obviously the greenest option, a medium impact to visitor experience. And that's something you might not expect, but in asking questions, we'd say like, well, actually, we're a little concerned. The size of this field, people are going to have to drive by that. And that's not the perception they have of a national park. So, that might, be like an interesting thing that you hadn't considered. And then a high risk posed by changing visitation. So if visitation increases, suddenly they might not be able to cover all of the energy costs that they have. Or if it declines, they risk building out too big of a solar grid. So this kind of thing is a great way to balance all of the different information you will gather. Again, the more structured you can be, and like create this table before you start asking questions, because the information will come kind of fast and furious there for a few minutes. But like to give it as an example and a best practice. So again, to be clear, we're not going to give you this table. We're going to expect you to get the information out of us and write the table down yourself. It will look maybe something like this. I will say we are the business management group, so you will probably be comparing costs and benefits of some sort, but it might not always be this tidy. Yeah. So Jeb and Sydney, I haven't really analyzed any of this information, but if you were the candidate who is looking at this for the first time after hearing it, you take a minute and say, okay, I'm gonna review all of the information before I make a recommendation. What stands out to you? And I'm gonna pick on Sydney first so that we don't have an awkward face off here.
Okay, thanks, Steven. Yeah, one thing to consider is the fact that the total costs for the 3 different projects are all within a fairly small range, but that if you look at the table, the capital costs differ quite substantially. And that could be something to note in your answer, is that, you know, the generators have a very small upfront cost, and that could impact what decision the park makes. If they only have a certain amount of money to put upfront in the first year, then that could be a consideration. And then these other considerations around environmental costs and impact to visitor experience and the risk, those aren't necessarily quantifiable, but they're still incredibly important. And that's why it's also important to remember that there isn't one right answer. This isn't a riddle. You have to assign what you think is the value to environmental costs versus the impact to visitor experience. You know, if the visitor experience at the park is more important, then that might be something worth considering, and seeing that, you know, for some of them, it might be, you know, you see low, medium, high, and for risk posed by the change of visitation versus the environmental costs. And so you could assign some sort of quantifiable numerical value to that, but just bringing that into your analysis while seeing that, you know, some of the parks might have higher upfront costs, but then lower risk to the environment is something to bring out in your final recommendation.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. I will say too, to build on that point before kicking it over to Jeb, I think those are great points, particularly with those more kind of qualitative criteria that we're looking across the different columns. As you see something like this, you know, start building out, and you might have the point of like, oh shoot, I don't know how the park might weigh environmental costs. I don't know how the park might weigh that against visitor experience. So ask us, because even if we don't have an answer, it tells us that like you are thinking about how you weigh these things. And that is our job at the National Park Service, to be constantly weighing all of these things. So it shows insight that you were thinking about it. And we may have some anecdote of like, oh, well, glad you asked. You know, actually, we just got a call from the senator, and she is very concerned about the size of a microgrid, and you know, that there might be considerable political backlash to that. And see like, oh, okay, I'm going to note that might not be very feasible. So even though that's the best option from an environmental perspective, we have to weigh that visitor experience and kind of feasibility. So this is a great start, and I think the point I want to make is, don't just say like, I think that's high. Confirm with us, like confirm with your interviewer how we think about these different criteria once you kind of start capturing what it looks like. All right, Jeb, hopefully I didn't take your point there.
I think you kind of did. You know, I would have gone with feel free to ask a lot of questions and in-depth questions. So like, if you ask, you know, the risk posed by changing visitation, what's the elasticities of visitors? We probably don't have that answer. So we're not probably trying to go that crazy in depth, or what's the inflation rate over the next 10 years. But those are interesting points that you might bring up by asking those in-depth questions. So asking more questions in general, as long as it fits the framework and the thought process makes a lot of sense, don't be afraid to ask questions. So that would be a big piece. But then when you give your final recommendation, be confident with that final recommendation and back it up with logic. I think if you look at this table and you quantify low and medium and high as 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, you'll do these costs and you'll find out that 2 of the 3 solutions have the same cost, and then one is more expensive. So you might be arguing yourself, well, which is better between the 2? Choose one that you think is better and be confident and explain why you're confident with that recommendation. Because I think all 3 of these can be argued, and they can be argued very well. But if you start second guessing or say, well, you could do either or, that may not be what we're looking for.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm gonna move on, so we have a little bit more time at the end for questions. That was great. It was like a flashback to interviewing you both and hearing how you approach the analytical exercise. So thanks for that. Just some tips and best practices to end on here before we open up to questions. If you have never kind of done a case interview before, practice with a classmate or someone in your career services office. If you have never heard of it before today, that's okay. Again, that was me. I casually mentioned it to one of my classmates and was like, I've never done that before. He was like, oh no, we need to practice. So we practiced the night before, and I am so grateful. I owe my career to him, because I would have probably not done as well in the interview had I not at least had one run through. And you kind of make yourself vulnerable there, but it's a good practice to structure your thinking. Stuff we hit on: take organized notes, repeat back information so we know you're hearing it. Talk it through out loud. Don't rely on Excel or a calculator. So we are not testing your ability to do mental math. You can use Excel, you can use a calculator. I would strongly advise not using an Excel spreadsheet. It just takes way too long, and if you're like me, no matter how good you are at setting up Excel formulas, like doing it live while talking with someone, in my experience, is very hard. And the second you like mess it up, then you've got to explain like why you are got to go back, and you like it's not worth it. The numbers we give you will not be that difficult, so you can use just a calculator, and that will probably be more efficient. Yeah, think big picture, break it down into pieces. In a sense, that's really what we're trying to get an understanding of, is can you take a big problem and break it down into pieces? Again, big picture in mind, we are asking you these questions to see if you will be a good BPI consultant, where you will take a big problem and break it down in small pieces over the course of the summer to develop a recommendation. So, with that insight, show us why you're good at that and how you would approach these things. Remember your audience. I work for the National Park Service, and I am thinking about the National Park Service mission. That's what we are mandated to think about. So like little tip, wise up to the National Park Service mission and how we approach our work. Make a recommendation. This is a Jeb's point. Support it with your rationale. And again, try to be in a quiet setting. So with that, I think that concludes our formal portion. We have 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and would love to answer as many questions as we can fit in.
You said that example was loosely based on a real life thing. What solution did they end up going with, and why? Just out of curiosity.
I knew I was going to get that question. Yeah, no, thanks for that. So loosely based, it was it's simplified quite a bit. One of the pieces that they were really struggling with was visitation, and the fact that visitation was suddenly declining a whole lot, and they were having a hard time figuring out how that should inform their thinking. The other piece around visitation was, while it was declining, it was becoming more extreme at peak times. And so they were really in this predicament of there were a number of people who really wanted to build the big microgrid that would just cover them with solar power. And the problem with that is you needed to build such a big microgrid that was only being used to its full capacity for like 2 months out of the year. And so that became, when you kind of outline it that perspective, like, okay, like we're not going to build a big microgrid. So the question really then became, what percentage, like how much of our total energy costs do we cover? Where's the sweet spot? So a lot of the analysis went from like, okay, we're not going to just do generators. It is super expensive to ship fuel to this area, and like it is becoming less and less feasible. So we know we're going to build some sort of solar. What is the right size? And so we quickly moved to that kind of question, and then it was more of a conversation of what the park priorities were, and where like that changing visitation was best, like kind of fit into that equation. So a little wishy-washy answer, but yeah, it was somewhere in the range of like 65% of their total visitation, or their peak visitation.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Drew, I can see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate this, y'all. This has been great. So my question is around kind of the idea of sustainability, conservation. I'd be curious how the NPS kind of breaks down. There's obviously two big ideas. Like, are there specific areas that the NPS is looking into and assessing a new project or thinking about sustainability or conservation impacts? I'm just thinking about this in the context of like breaking down that bucket in the context of a analytical exercise or a case of sorts.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I understand your question fully, and I also want to model this is how you could approach a case, ask a little deeper. So what I heard you say is kind of how we think about sustainability, or like what that is a big bucket. And so what are we thinking of? Yeah, good insight there. Yeah, that's a big one. I would say one of the things, particularly with I'll approach this from like a building new things perspective. The teams that are analyzing those investments over the last 3 to 5 years have really been pushed to think through sustainability from a like resiliency model. And so not just a big solar microgrid is going to be putting out the lowest or the least carbon emissions, but how resilient are we to different effects of climate change? And so rising sea levels, or hotter temperatures, or drier summers, or whatever the case might be. And so I think that's one way, especially as we're thinking about building something over the long term. That's one way that we pull in sustainability in a really practical sense of what is the life cycle costs of building this thing. As an agency or a bureau, our mandate is forever. And so we have to think really critically about how we approach forever, and understanding that nothing we build is going to last forever. So we've got to have a plan for 30 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 5 years from now, and like how that affects what we do right now. And so kind of thinking through long timelines, long time frames, and sometimes it just means reducing immediate risk to kind of, I don't want to say like kick the can down the road, but address some of those longer term risks when we have more data, essentially. Like when we have more information of what this is going to look like, then maybe we'll consider building the giant thing on the edge of the ocean. Like we're not going to do that right now. And so how do we get through the next 5 years, or how do we get through the next 15 years? That's just one example that pops to mind. So hopefully I didn't dodge your question completely.
Super helpful. Thanks.
Gilly, go ahead.
Hey, thank y'all so much for setting aside this time to tell us all about kind of what the interview process looks like. I'm curious about, for the former BPI consultants, what did you think that you were going to be getting out of this internship, and where was it going to direct you for your career? And now on the other side of that, how do you see that it actually did direct you?
Yeah, I'm happy to tackle that one. I came in with zero public sector experience, and a big reason of why I applied to the National Park Service first, well, two big reasons. One, I really believe in the mission. I was an Eagle Scout in high school, and I just enjoy the outdoors, so that was a big piece of it. But I just wanted to know what it's like to work for the federal government, and it didn't have to be in DC for me. For those who are maybe are on the policy side of things versus the business side of things. But I just wanted to pivot into public sector work, and the internship was amazing. And then this role opened up, and I wanted to remain in the public sector. So I said, okay, I'm coming back to the Park Service. But the beautiful part after doing the internship is that you have a lot of opportunities to join the Park Service. It doesn't just have to be in Washington, D.C. It can be in a park. Two people that was in my BPI class. One is at the Golden Gate Bridge. Steven, I don't remember the name of the park unit. I don't have them all memorized yet. And the other one's at Point Reyes National Seashore. So they're enjoying their time in California working for the Park Service, like on the front lines, which is pretty awesome.
I can quickly go. I studied political science in undergrad, and I'm very interested in the public sector, but came into business school not knowing exactly where I wanted to go after I graduated. And I viewed the BPI internship as a really great opportunity for a few reasons. One, I think it's just incredibly unique. There's not really any other internship, at least that I was made aware of while in grad school, that would give me this opportunity to go, necessarily work in a fairly remote location. There's a wide range of projects available during your summer. So if, you want to be in a region, if you want to be in the city, or if you want to be really remote, you have that opportunity. And I found that really exciting. And I also think that as unique as the internship is, I think the skills and the experience you gain are pretty applicable to a lot of different industries and functions after you graduate from whatever master's program you're in. And so, it's broad-based consulting. So if you want to go in consulting, I think it has that skill set it will prepare you for. And I didn't go in knowing that I'd want to necessarily work for the Park Service, but I also had such a great time. And I think the mission is a big draw for a lot of people. It's a really great way to feel like having some sort of impact and getting to use both my private sector experience and what I learned in business school, along with my passion for the public sector and for doing government work. So that's what brought me into it and what I've really got out of it.
I think we have time for another question, Nathan.
Oh, that was just the applause thing. That was a really
Oh,
good
no, the
answer. I like
applause. I'm
that.
sorry. I'm sorry. Well, I didn't get a chance to add in. I will just add. I came from the nonprofit sector and went to public policy school, and so when I heard about this internship, for me, it was a combination of doing something that I was motivated, very mission driven. I was motivated to continue on that path while getting some public sector experience, and also I had a sense that I might be good at kind of a consulting role, a consulting skill set. I didn't have much experience there, and so I approached it as a really great way to kind of get hands-on experience in management consulting in a less traditional setting that I thought would be more kind of aligned with my skills and interests, and didn't necessarily approach it that like I was going to be starting a career with the Park Service by any means, and that's fine. Yeah, it took about like a week and a half before I was like, oh, I'm in. So then it was networking from there of like who can I talk to, where can I get a job after graduation.
I'm gonna ask a question on behalf of those who have not thought of it yet, or those who have not been able to attend. I always think this is fascinating, especially considering we have new interviewers every year. What's your interview ick? Like, someone could be doing really well and then all of a sudden they step into something What are the things that you've given us some really good ideas of like what to do, but what would you advise folks not to do in their case exercise?
Yeah, I guess I will go because Sydney and Jeb get to experience that for the first time this year. What I think back, a few years ago, and it is not the prompt this year, so you don't need to take notes, but it was essentially a loosely based prompt. It was a prompt loosely based on a challenge that Yellowstone National Park was facing, and they were basically tearing up all of their roads anyway, and so they took the opportunity to lay fiber optic cable underneath them to kind of provide high-speed internet to the park and administrative offices and visitors. And so the analytical exercise was kind of around how should we approach this? What are the costs? What are the benefits? How much do you invest in kind of thinking through how much fiber optic cable do we need? And I had one candidate tell me straight out, well, that's a waste of money because that is not how you should experience a national park. And for me, like, my own personal perspective is like, yeah, I want to get on a trail. I want to get out there. I want to like unplug. But as the National Park Service, we are responsible for making these national parks, these places, these special places relevant and accessible to everyone. And some people might need that. And it's not on us to say the right way to experience a national park. And so like that was one where it was like, oh, I definitely got that ick feeling of like, we're not here to tell people how to experience things or gatekeep in that way. We are here to, again, preserve and protect and make these relevant to this and future generations. And so, yeah, kind of that was one where I was like, ooh, have you looked at our mission? Like that's not quite aligned. So sorry if I got up on my soapbox for a second, Kellen. Take that opportunity.
It's good. I built the soapbox for you, so it's on me. So I think that's a very general advice. Like the mission will guide you in almost I think in every step of the application process, whether it's the written application where we talk about it specifically, whether it's in the behavioral questions, in the one-way video interview, and what we kind of espouse as like character traits that support that mission, and then finally in the case interview when you're answering those questions kind of more directly. So great. I think we're at time. So I want to be respectful of folks that have other commitments after this. This, however, is an open line of communication, so you can always reach out to us, hello@purposefulgrowth.org, to answer any questions that you might have in this final week before the deadline. Please do feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you to the BMG team for sharing those great insights. And we hope to see more of you in the coming weeks. Take care, everyone.